We are men, and our lot is to learn and to be hurled into inconceivable new worlds. A warrior who sees energy knows that there is no end to the new worlds for our vision. Hello there and welcome once again, wherever you may be on the surface of our planet. I hope you're well this week, although truth be told, some weeks are a lot harder than others, aren't they? I've got a small mouse trapped in one of my kitchen cupboards at the moment. I really don't know what to do about it. He seems to be a very clever mouse. I don't know if he's a student of Gurdjieff. Could be. Well, I've got some material from Castenada at the end. But the main reading is from Gurdjieff on Prosphora, or bread, and how the three metaphysical forces that exist in the universe act during the making of bread. And although the example of flour, water and yeast, it often comes up when people talk about the fourth way, I was struggling a little bit with it to try and make some progress, and I was able to. But before I give you my thoughts, let's hear from the man himself. Certainly, a permanent fusion of the active elements in the interior of products is obtained by boiling or roasting them. You will understand clearly if you can represent to yourself the process that occurs during the artificial preparation of Prosphora, or bread, is generally made everywhere by beings who are aware of its sacred significance. Only your contemporary favourites prepare it without any consciousness of what they do, merely as a practice automatically transmitted to them by inheritance. In this bread, the crystallization of cosmic substances proceeds, as always, in accordance with the law of Trimesicamno, whose three holy forces are represented by substances from three relatively independent sources, namely, the holy affirming or active principle is represented by the totality of cosmic substances composing what your favourites called water, and the holy denying or passive principle by the totality of substances composing what your favourites call flour, obtained from the divine wheat grain, and the holy reconciling or neutralising by the substances obtained from burning, or as your favourites say, from fire. To clarify, the idea I expressed about the significance of a permanent fusion of cosmic substances from diverse sources, let us take as an example that relatively independent totality of substances which serves as the active principle, water. This relatively independent totality of substances called water is in itself, one might say, a natural mechanical mixture, and can be preserved only provided that it keeps its connection with nature. If the link between this water and nature is cut, that is, if a little of this water is taken out of a river and kept separately in some receptacle, after a certain period of time the water in this vessel inevitably begins, little by little, to be destroyed, or as is otherwise said, to decompose, and this process usually has a very malodorous effect on the perceptive organs of beings, or as your favourites would say, this water soon begins to stink. The same thing will take place with the mixture of this water with flour. Only a temporary mechanical mixture, or what is called a dough, will be obtained, in which the water, after a relatively short time, will inevitably decompose. But if this dough, namely this mixture of water with flour, is baked over fire, then thanks to the substances issuing from fire, which, as I have already said, serve as the third holy neutralizing force of the sacred law of Triamesikamno, the result will be a chemical fusion or a permanent fusion of substances, whereby this new totality of substances obtained from the water and the flour, that is, this Prosphora or bread, will now resist the merciless hero pass and will not decompose for a much longer time. Bread made in this way can dry, crumble, or even, to all appearances, completely disintegrate, yet the elements of water which have taken part in this process of transformation will not be destroyed for rather a long time, but will remain active among what are called the enduring Prosphorian active elements. Now I repeat, my boy, that if the contemporary beings breeding on the continent of Asia preserve their products exclusively in a roasted or boiled state and not raw, as the contemporary American beings prefer to do, this is because these usages reached them from their ancestors, whose communities had lasted for many centuries and who therefore had a long practical experience behind them. Whereas the community of those American beings was just, as our wise teacher would say, born yesterday. And in order that you may better evaluate the real significance of this invention of the contemporary beings breeding on the continent of America, an invention which is, as it were, the genuine outcome of contemporary civilization, I do not consider it superfluous to inform you also about the methods still employed by the beings of the continent of Asia for preserving certain other products. For example, the method of preparing what is called korvorma, a favorite product of the beings of many groups on the continent of Asia. This korvorma is prepared on the continent of Asia very simply. Small pieces of well-roasted meat are packed tightly into earthenware jars or burduks, that is, specially treated goat skins. Melted fat from a sheep's tail is then poured over these roasted pieces of meat. Although the pieces of roasted meat thus covered with fat will also gradually spoil, for a relatively long period they do not become poisonous. The beings of the continent of Asia eat this korvorma either cold or heated up. When heated, it is as if the meat came from a freshly killed animal. Another favorite product which can be preserved for a long time is what is called yagliamish, which is made of various fruits freshly picked and strung on a cord in the form of a necklace and thoroughly boiled in water. These odd necklaces are then cooled and dipped several times in melted sheep's tail fat, after which they are hung up somewhere and allowed to dry in an airy place. However long it hangs, fruit prepared in this way scarcely ever spoil, and when these odd necklaces are to be used for food, they are dipped into hot water for a moment, whereupon all the fat melts off and entirely disappears, and the fruit itself has the same flavour as if it had been freshly picked from the tree. Even though fruit preserved like this differs very little in taste from fresh fruits and will keep a long time, all those on the continent of Asia who are more prosperous prefer fresh fruit. And they prefer fresh fruit obviously because, thanks to their inherited capacities as direct descendants of the beings of long-standing ancient communities, in most of them the crystallizing of data for the instinctive sensing of reality proceeds more intensively than in most of your other contemporary favorites. I repeat, my boy, that on your planet the beings of past epochs, especially those breeding on the continent of Asia, had attempted many times to use various methods of preserving edible products, and it always ended in the same way. First, certain persons, through their conscious or accidental observations, discovered the harmful consequences of this practice both for themselves and for those near them. Then they communicated this to all the other beings who, after making observations on themselves as impartially as possible, also became convinced of the correctness of these deductions, and ultimately they all ceased to employ these practices in the processes of their existence. It's a longer passage. At the end he talks about preserving, but let's begin a little bit with the bread making. He doesn't mention yeast, which surprised me. I guess he's left a gap there for us. And he seems to be saying that water that comes from the life of rivers is preserved in bread. In other words, it is the water part that has this affirming energy that we get from bread. That also surprised me. I thought he would make more of a deal of the wheat germ itself. And water being affirming is the top of the Trinity that is being fused, whereas the wheat is like the body. In church during communion, I only take the sacrament, the wafer, but alongside the priest somebody is holding wine. And clearly the body and blood are two lines, are feeding two different elements within us. That's the meaning of that. Water is so universal for us, we don't even think about it. But yes, compared to flour, it is a more refined substance. It flows. It is from a higher scale than the grain. Quite amazing, all of this, really. I'm by no means an expert on bread making, but my own thoughts were that it's actually quite a complicated process, because when you mix the water with the grain, sugars and starches become dissolved in solution, which makes the dough sticky, and as you knead it, it changes. Still there's no yeast, still there's no fire, but there is already a three-dimensional process occurring there. Water meets grain, and something is starting to happen inside it already. The yeast is actually a kind of dormant fungi that lives almost in suspended animation, but when it is introduced into the dough and is able to consume those sugars, of course it produces the carbon dioxide gas, becomes active, and it's adding something to the dough, those gases that make it rise, and then the fire hits it and does something else. I don't know enough about chemistry or physical processes that occur. As bread is made, so we are made. We are also a microcosm of the macrocosm. Such knowledge can render all of life one circle inside another circle, inside the great circle, and unify all the scales of life right down into our life, and that is called the light in our lives. That is the light, and this world needs light. Every time a man sets himself to learn, he has to labour as hard as anyone can, and the limits of his learning are determined by his own nature. Therefore, there is no point in talking about knowledge. Fear of knowledge is natural. All of us experience it, and there is nothing we can do about it. But no matter how frightening learning is, it is more terrible to think of a man without knowledge. To be angry at people means that one considers their acts to be important. It is imperative to cease to feel that way. The acts of men cannot be important enough to offset our only viable alternative, our unchangeable encounter with infinity. Anything is one of a million paths. Therefore, a warrior must always keep in mind that a path is only a path. If he feels he should not follow it, he must not stay with it under any conditions. His decision to keep on that path or to leave it must be free from fear or ambition. He must look at every path closely and deliberately. There is a question that a warrior has to ask: does this path have a heart? All paths are the same. They lead nowhere. However, a path without a heart is never enjoyable. On the other hand, a path with a heart is easy. It does not make a warrior work at liking it. It makes for a joyful journey. As long as a man follows it, he is one with it. There is a world of happiness where there is no difference between things because there is no one there to ask about that difference. But that is not the world of men. Some men have the vanity to believe that they live in two worlds, but that is only their vanity. There is but one single world for us. We are men and must follow the world of men contentedly. A man has 4 natural enemies: fear, clarity, power, and old age. Fear, clarity, and power can be overcome, but not old age. Its effect can be postponed, but it can never be overcome. Take care and thank you for listening.